All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is a week 15 all-22 review where we will be breaking down the film from the Falcons' week 15 loss to the 49ers, talking about how the team's red zone struggles contribute to the ongoing debate about the Falcons' talent versus coaching issues, as well as talking about some legit talent deficiencies that the team has up front and ways that they may go about fixing them.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, giving you that weekly content over at the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. And, of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is sponsored by Stance Apparel. Stance believes that the perfect fit matters more than fitting in. Enjoy the color and comfort of a life less ordinary with Stance. So today's episode is our weekly all-22 review, this time breaking down the film from the week 15 loss to the San Francisco 49ers. We'll start things off talking about the team's red zone struggles and whether that contributes to the ongoing debate, whether or not the Falcons are suffering from a coaching issue and a talent issue, or one or the other. Then we'll get into a conversation about the Falcons' on offensive line issues, the talent deficiencies maybe that they have up there, and we'll get a little bit into how they need to address them. And yes, we will be taking a trip to the Kaleb McGary Island once again, but I'll explain why we continue to vacation at this rotten destination that is known as Kaleb McGary Island here on the Locked On Falcons podcast further on today. And then, of course, as we often do on these all-22 reviews, we have an opportunity to answer some listener questions. And this one's a listener question about Dave Ragone, the Falcons offensive coordinator who does not call the plays. And sort of because of that, how do we discuss and evaluate Dave Ragone, and we'll get into that towards the end of today's episode. But before we get into all of that, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify. And now, of course, free and available, the video version at least, on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And when you do, make sure you give us that like, that thumbs up, leave a comment, all that sort of jazz. So let's jump into the all-22. And of course, the thing that stands out from this game is the red zone struggles. And, that allows us to continue to frame and contextualize the ongoing debate about the Falcons' talent versus coaching issues. And we've discussed that ad nauseum all season long. But for those of you that need an update, the Falcons went 1 for 5, converting, their 5 red zone trips into 1 touchdown in this game. And you can certainly say 2 out of the 4 failures were mostly execution issues. You can talk about the first opening series after the fumble and the kickoff in the opening minutes of the game. I would probably blame the execution more as a problem than necessarily play calling in that instance. I'm not going to necessarily slam the play calling. I certainly can nitpick and criticize the play calling there, but the Falcons had some opportunities to score there. They did not, although technically I'm sure many of you, they did score, but the officials took it off the board. But they still had 4 opportunities to score, and they failed 3 of those 4 times, at least 3 of those 4 times. Then you talk about the execution issues in the third quarter, their next opportunity, because the next time they got into red zone, they scored on a Russell Gage touchdown, which was a great throw and catch by Matt Ryan, great catch by Russell Gage. In the third quarter, in the opening part of the third quarter, their opening drive there, they were able to drive the length of the field, had to settle for a field goal, largely due to an execution problem when it came to Jalen Mayfield missing a block on Arden Key. Tajay Sharp was wide open on that play. Matt Ryan was ready to throw him the football, but just didn't have enough time, and that was a failure on the offensive line, so you can't necessarily nitpick play calling. However, in the 2 red zone opportunities in the fourth quarter, I do feel like play calling and really the conversation around coaching becomes a lot more paramount. It's harder for me to give Arthur Smith the same slack for those two drives late in the game as I did earlier in the game. The 4th-and-1 play, the fourth red zone opportunity where the Falcons ran a crack toss on 4th-and-1. And that to me is just an instance of poor coaching. That's an instance where the obvious to me play call is just to sneak it. The Falcons, we've talked about this ad nauseum this season. The Falcons have been very good on the rare opportunities where they've run quarterback sneaks, but just refuse to run them in these short yardage situations, which I think is a contributing factor to why the Falcons are one of the worst short yardage teams in the NFL this season. But on that particular 4th-and-1 crack toss play, you're asking Russell Gage to down block Nick Bosa. And he doesn't do it. Nick Bosa spins out of it. And instead of having, 4 blockers taking on 4 guys, because Gage whiffs on that block, as you would expect him to do, trying to block one of the best players in the NFL, you now have 3 blockers instead on 4 guys. And of course, you're already asking Cordero Patterson to run 7 yards by taking that toss in the backfield to gain 1 yard. And now all of a sudden he has to also make a free defender miss in the open field. It's just a classic case of coaching making it harder on what little talent the Falcons have. And given the Falcons' talent concerns, their margin for error is much lower than it is for a lot of other teams. That's really what we're talking about when it comes to talent, is that, talent is the difference between your margin for error. And there is already pretty slim, and the coaching is not helping in that regard. And you go to the final drive where, you got a 3rd-and-2, you got a 4th-and-1 in the closing minutes of the game, and you're deciding to go shotgun and throwing the ball and putting your pass protection, which has been problematic all game long, in a position where they have to hold up. On the 3rd-and-2, they didn't. And that led to Matt Ryan scrambling and missing a potentially open Kyle Pitts in the back of the end zone. And then on the 4th-and-1, you're dialing up a play to Christian Blake or whatever the case may be. I mean, I guess Matt Ryan was technically looking for Russell Gage on that play, wasn't looking in Kyle Pitts' direction, who was maybe arguably open on the slant or whatever. I'm not blaming Matt Ryan for that, but it's just like a situation where, the play call that you have is basically like someone running it open. It's just, and it's 4th-and-1. And again, you just sneak it and you get the touchdown or whatever the case may be. But this is where a situation where the Falcons go into the red zone 5 times and they come away with 10 points in this game, but in a situation where you're getting better play calling, better coaching, better execution, whatever you want to call it, that should be 20 points or that should be 24 points. And if that's the case, then in those final 5 minutes of the game where San Francisco gets the ball back, instead of this being a 31-13 game, maybe it's a 31-23 game. Maybe it's a 31-27 game. And this gets back to the point I've been making all along when it comes to this coaching and talent issue. Do the Falcons have more talent than the 49ers? No. Do the Falcons have enough talent to beat a team like the 49ers? No. But the Falcons, to me, have more than enough talent, if the coaching is doing its job, to be at least more competitive in these games going into the closing minutes, in a 1-score ball game against this 49ers team. That, to me, the reason why the Falcons weren't in that position in this game in week 15 is not because they lack talent, is simply because their coaching is not getting the most talent. And that's been the point I've been, echoing time and time again. And, you look at some of these situations with Arthur Smith. Again, this is not to sit here and blame all the Falcons' problems on Arthur Smith. It's just to sit here and say, like, you got to hold these guys accountable when they mess up. You can't just continually give them a pass, as seemingly Falcon fans want to do now with Arthur Smith because of reasons. We used to kill Sark when he would run crack toss all the time in short yardage situations. We used to kill him. And we used to, this is why Sark is bad. And this is what, and now when Arthur Smith does, it's like, oh, well, he's a first year coach and he's fine. And it's like, okay, and like the reason why that is again, going back to the point I made over and over again is narratives, right? The narrative then was Sark is the reason, or you can even point at Dirk Cutter for different reasons, but the coaches are the reasons why this team is not achieving. And now, because of the narrative that we've now finally found the coach that is going to solve that problem, we just basically give him a pass. And for me, it's just one of those things where, again, I'm not trying to blame all the Falcons' problems on Arthur Smith, but like I feel like he doesn't deserve a pass, for basically making the same mistakes that we've killed previous offensive coordinators for. Like, at least be consistent. That's all I'm asking for. Now, that being said, you're probably sitting here saying, okay, well, let's talk about consistency, Aaron. Let's talk about how you constantly defend Kaleb McGary and constantly criticizing Jalen Mayfield. And let's see what you have to say about that. And you're absolutely right. Like I'm going to be a hypocrite right now, and I'm going to defend Kaleb McGary. We're going to take a trip back to Kaleb McGary Island, but I'm. It's not because I have some agenda. It is because I have a bias, and I will explain that bias of why I continually seem to take it easy on Kaleb McGary moving forward, and not give that same pass to others as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, looking at the All-22 from this Week 15 game. But before we get there, guys, Super Bowl 56 at SoFi is less than 60 days away. And On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL, is the only place to score a once-in-a-lifetime Super Bowl ticket and experience package. You can pick your perfect spot at SoFi by selecting your exact seats and choose from elite experiences featuring exclusive pre-game celebrations where you can meet and greet NFL legends. You can stay at 5-star LA hotels. You can see headline musical performances, an open bar, and tailgate with food by the great Wolfgang Puck. Pick your preferred package by visiting onlocationexp.com/SB56 for more information, or search Super Bowl On Location. That's onlocationexp.com/SB56, or search Super Bowl On Location for more info. So when we talk about this Week 15 game, no doubt about it, Kaleb McGary was awful in this game. One of the worst games he's ever played, and as bad, if not worse, than any of the nightmare performances he had back in 2019 against the Shaq Barretts and the Dante Fowlers and the Cameron Jordans or whatever it is. You can put this game up against Nick Bosa with any of those things. However, in his defense, as we often do here on Locked On Falcons, as we stay on this dreaded island known as Kaleb McGary Island, I don't think Kaleb McGary's performance against the 49ers, as dreadful as it was, has been the norm this year. He's had certainly some awful reps over the course of this season, but this has not been as consistent and constant as it was on Sunday going up against Nick Bosa. You compare and contrast that to Jalen Mayfield. His bad performance in this game was the norm that we have seen pretty consistently outside of maybe 2 games this year. And for me, again, as I'm going to sit here and defend my choices of vacationing on this dreadful island named Kaleb McGary Island, if we have to, if you're going to get wrecked by a player, is basically what I'm going to say here. And Kaleb McGary got absolutely wrecked by a player. It's probably a tad more forgivable that you're getting wrecked by Nick Bosa than getting wrecked by Arden Key or Kevin Givens. And I'm sure some of you are like, who the heck is Kevin Givens? And that's exactly my point. But like, I continually criticize Jalen Mayfield, not because I have this agenda against Jalen Mayfield. It's not a personal vendetta. It's not personal, guys. But there is a bias here. And that bias is not specific to Jalen Mayfield. It's not specific to Kaleb McGary. It's, if Josh Andrews or Kobe Gossett was a starting left guard, we'd still be talking about the left guard position more than we'd be talking about the right tackle. If Matt Gano or Jason Spriggs was the right tackle instead of Kaleb McGary, we'd still be talking about the left guard position more than that. And I think this 49ers game really illustrates what I'm getting at, because for most of the first half, and this is a point I've raised many times on the podcast, for most of the first half, the Falcons went out of their way to try to give Kaleb McGary help, right? They were either running a lot of play action, hoping that would slow down Nick Bosa, because that allows Kaleb McGary to release as more of a run blocker and be the aggressor there than necessarily sitting back and waiting for Nick Bosa to come at him, which was, makes him a sitting duck. And when the Falcons did get into a drop back passing game, they often put a tight end on that side or a wide receiver on that side that would chip Nick Bosa, give him a nice elbow before releasing into a route, or you would have the running back out there chipping before he would release or slide to that protection. So you had 2 guys blocking 1 guy. And for most of the first half of the game, that was effective for the Falcons. Like Kaleb McGary, when you go back and watch the first quarter and probably the first few minutes of the second quarter, you're not going to see too many instances of Kaleb McGary getting absolutely wrecked in this game. And that was part of the Falcons game plan. And, as the game progressed and the Falcons fell behind and they had to get a little bit more in the drop back passing game, they couldn't rely as much on their play action passing, because there was no longer a fear of the 49ers to have to stop the run because they fell behind and whatnot. that became problematic. And so it's one of those things that I've talked about time and time again on the podcast is like you can kind of scheme things when it comes to your right tackle a lot easier than you can your left guard. You can't put a tight end next to him. You can't put the running back constantly at that part of the position because it makes your protections more vulnerable because the running back more often than not has to be free to pick up any extra rusher that the five offensive linemen don't account for. So you can't always devote that to the left guard as easily as you can to the right tackle, right? And so that eventually got exposed. And again, as I said before, like you can do that more for the right tackle position, but you can't do it every snap, as this game illustrated. But like for me, the point is like if you have a liability at right tackle, it is easier for you to scheme and hide that better with coaching and these various elements that the Falcons were utilizing in the first quarter of this game than it is at the left guard. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. And so it gets back to the point I've made several times on this podcast over the last year is that, you know, Kaleb McGary going through his struggles as much as he has this season, to me is the much lesser of two evils compared to Jalen Mayfield going through his struggles. And I think that's going to be the same issue moving forward, right? You know, I think the other element of that we'll continue to talk about on today's Locked On Falcons is that to me, it's more important for you to have a strong interior offensive line than it is to have two bookend offensive tackles. That's why it's not a specific to Jalen Mayfield thing. This has been something I've been hammering on this podcast. If you go back to listen to the episodes in January and February, that's why I was sitting here saying we need to go out there and get Joe Thuney. We need to solidify this interior offensive line because I firmly believe that when you have a quarterback like Matt Ryan, it is much more critical for you to have a good interior offensive line than two bookend offensive tackles. And I'll explain that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons episode. But before we get there, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, I always have recommendations for what your second listen should be. And of course, if you're Atlanta local or big fan of local sports, of course, we got you covered here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We got the Locked On Hawks podcast getting you geared up for hopefully Trae Young's reemergence in MSG later this week in Christmas. Locked On Braves, my cousin Freddie has got you is got Braves fans in turmoil over what his future is going to be. And of course, Locked On Braves is covering you all the angles on what happens if Freddie comes back, what happens if Freddie doesn't come back. Check that out on Locked On Braves. And Locked On Bulldogs, of course, is getting you guys geared up for the upcoming big playoff matchup between Georgia and whether or not this team is poised to get that much elusive national title that Georgia fans have been, barking at, howling at the moon. I don't know what Bulldogs do, but Locked On Bulldogs has you covered there. So check out all three of those shows on the same podcast platforms. You can check out Locked On Falcons, and Locked On Braves and Locked On Bulldogs is also free and available on YouTube as well. So it's the holiday season, guys, and why not grab yourself a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar or even better than a candy bar? And if you don't know what I'm talking about Built Bars, the best tasting protein bar on the market. Built Bars are rich with decadent flavor. They're covered in chocolate, but they're healthy too. They're low in sugar, low in calories, low in carbs, low in fat, high in protein, high in fiber. You get the best of both worlds, both delicious and healthy. Built Bars have so many flavors, it's hard to choose. You got limited time flavors like candy cane brownie bites, ruby chocolate, lemon dip cheesecake. You got holiday flavors like gingerbread and eggnog. You got coconut brownie chunk, which was voted the best flavor in Built Bar's March Madness tourney earlier this year. You can get tried and true favorites like coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, salted caramel, cherry barcia, cookies and cream, double chocolate, and so much more. Go choose your favorite or build your own box by heading over to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So the reason why we continue to harp on this, guys, is because this is going to be important this offseason. We know that the Falcons are, or at least I believe that the Falcons are going to prioritize rebuilding their offensive line this offseason as their primary methodology of improving this offense. And the reason why I will continue to hammer these points home while we're talking about, is it more important to invest in the left guard position, the right guard position, or even you can throw the center position into that conversation, is because it's about self-evaluation. If you don't do a good job evaluating your own roster, it's going to be very hard for you to improve this unit because you're going to be looking at a situation potentially next year that you invest and improve the right tackle position, but then your interior is going to be problematic again, and you're going to still be wondering, why isn't our offense clicking to the degree that it's clicking, or, vice versa, or whatever the case may be. And it gets to the point where I think it's important for the Falcons to have a stronger interior with a quarterback like Matt Ryan, and build your offensive line inside out. And I've expressed this previous on the podcast, but we'll reiterate it just in case it didn't sink in the previous time, or you were relatively new to the podcast and didn't hear me explain this throughout the offseason. But Ryan, much like Tom Brady, much like Drew Brees, is a more of a quote unquote pocket quarterback, and you want to build your offensive line inside out, right? Strong interior. Again, you can't always have 5 superstars at your offensive line. Ideally, you can, but if you're gonna, if you want to have, typically a good offensive line is going to have 3 or 4 good starters. You want at least one of your tackles to be good, right? So if you have 3 good starters, and 2 out of the 3 interior guys should be good, if not all 3. So you look at that, because these quote unquote pocket quarterbacks, what they like to do is they like to slide left, they like to slide right, right? They like to step up into the pocket in order to locate those windows, and they need to have that sort of anchor point in front of them, that stout interior, so that they can have the room to slide left and slide right, so that those interior pass rushers get controlled, so that they have those lanes to slide into. And you see this, the Saints embody this perfectly over the last, 15 years with Drew Brees there, where they had really strong left guard, center, right guard combinations throughout that tenure. And even when you had great tackles like they've had with Teron Armstead, when Teron Armstead's missed a lot of snaps over the years, but it hasn't negatively affected the Saints offensive line to the degree that it would affect another team if they lost their all-pro left tackle, because they've always had that stout interior. And you contrast that with the quote unquote mobile quarterback, right? You look at a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or Cam Newton, for a more NFC South focus example. And those are teams that could or should, because one of them did not do it. But those are teams that want to build their offensive line outside in, right? And so Rodgers is a great example, because in Green Bay, he had David Bakhtiari as his left tackle, and, probably a Hall of Famer, if you ask me. And you had right tackle Brian Bulaga, that suffered from durability concerns, but when he was healthy, was one of the best right tackles in the game. And those guys provided anchor points for that pocket, so that when you had a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, who likes to slide this way or slide that way, and fling up those 40-yard bombs that we know Aaron Rodgers loves to do, those anchor points can control those edge rushers, so that when Aaron Rodgers would do those things and slide this way or slide that way, those edge rushers couldn't disengage from those tackles and then just make an easy sack when Aaron Rodgers slides past them, right? And you saw this reflected in the Chiefs this past season in the Super Bowl, where due to the injuries to Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, they were working with second and third string, maybe even a fourth string tackle by the time they got to the Super Bowl, due to those injuries. And all of a sudden, Patrick Mahomes couldn't use his usual Patrick Mahomes magic, because he didn't have those anchor points at the tackle position like he previously did. And you can make the argument that one of the reasons why Cam Newton was failed by the Carolina Panthers organization is because they basically ignored their left tackle position for the entirety of Cam Newton's career. What's the stat where the Panthers had a different left tackle in week 1 of every single season that Cam Newton was the starter there, or whatever the case may be. And and that was a part of why it didn't necessarily work for Cam Newton as maybe it would have worked for some of these other guys. And that's why I give a guy like Kaleb McGary a pass. I would give any right tackle a pass in that situation, because again, I feel like if you can afford to have a lesser player on your offensive line, if Kaleb McGary is going to be your 5th best starter, which ideally that's what he would be, it's easier to deal with that if that's the right tackle, given what I've talked about, given the ability to scheme, and given the fact that you have Matt Ryan as your quarterback. Now, if we had Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, if we had Justin Fields as a quarterback, maybe we would be having a much different conversation at this point in time. So I think ideally you want to upgrade all the positions across this offensive line if you can, but given that we know that the Falcons are not going to have an abundance of resources from a cap standpoint and from a draft pick standpoint, you kind of have to pick and choose your battles. And to me, that's why I don't think right tackle is as big a priority. And that's why we don't spend as much time hammering Kaleb McGary and his poor performances on this podcast as we have done for Jalen Mayfield at left guard position, and even Matt Hennessy to a lesser extent at the center position. I devoted, that all-22 review after the Patriots game talking about Matt Hennessy rather than talking about Kaleb McGary, who had a couple of bad reps against Matt Judon in that game. So, I feel like when we talk about trying to upgrade Kaleb McGary, because of the premium at the tackle position also plays a factor into it. The chances of you doing that without spending a lot of money in free agency, probably more money than you would have to spend on the interior, coupled with the fact that the premium in the draft is such that if you're going to find an upgrade over Kaleb McGary, you're probably going to have to use one of those early round picks, that first or one of those second round picks, I'm sorry, in this upcoming draft in order to do so, in order to enhance, because when you look at the history of capable right tackles and capable left tackles in the league, there aren't a lot of guys that are third and fourth round picks that are succeeding in the NFL. It's Teron Armstead, it's David Bakhtiari, and that's about it, and so like that hit rate after pick 40, pick 50 or so becomes very, very low when it comes to the offensive tackle position. But I'm sure some of you are sitting here saying, but Aaron, you're sitting here saying don't use a top 50 pick on an offensive tackle, but meanwhile earlier this week you were saying why not use a top 50 pick on a quarterback. You want to use a top 50 pick on a quarterback, and you've said before on the podcast that the hit rate on quarterbacks after pick 15 or so is also pretty low, and you'd be absolutely right. But it's not that I want the team to use a top 50 pick on a quarterback. I think the team will use a top 50 pick on a quarterback, and I've made my peace with that. And the justification for that is because it's a quarterback. It's not a tackle, right? We know Jake Matthews, or we believe Jake Matthews is going to be back in 2022. We know that Kaleb McGary is under contract in 2022. So you have options there, right? You wonder whether Jake Matthews is going to be back in 2023. You wonder if Kaleb McGary, given that his contract is very likely to expire after 2022 because he ain't getting a fifth-year option, is going to be back in 2023. So you're looking at your tackle position as a potential open position that is unknown. And for a lot of people, they look at that and say, why not secure your 2023 tackle today versus waiting till tomorrow? And I get that impetus. And it's a similar situation with Matt Ryan, right? Matt Ryan's going to be back, or we believe Matt Ryan's going to be back in 2022. I know there's been a lot of talk online the last couple of days that may not be the case, but I'm pretty confident at this point in time that will be the case. We don't know, as I've explained previously on the podcast, if Matt Ryan's going to be back in 2023. But for me, I look at the situation at the tackle position. I say, look, we don't know what the tackle situation is going to be in 2023, but I'm much more willing to cross that bridge when we get to it at the tackle position than I am at the quarterback position, because it's a quarterback. Guys, we know that there's a rich history of offensive tackles, first round picks particularly, that come into the league right away and succeed. You look at the Mekhi Bectons, you look at the Tristan Wirfs, right? You can look at a Chris Lindstrom to a lesser extent. I know he's not a tackle, but it's not unprecedented for you to sit here and draft a tackle that can come in and immediately solve a problem if you find the right guy. So to me, the idea of punting on the tackle position in 2023 is not some horrible, oh no, existential crisis. What are we going to do? I'm filled with dread. No, punting on the quarterback position, however, does give me a little bit more pause, because we know how important the quarterback position is to team success. We know that you're not having as much talent pool to choose from at the quarterback position. And we know that quarterback takes a long time to develop, and we don't know what that situation is going to be. So the whole point of drafting a quarterback in 2022 is not because, oh, this is going to magically solve all your problems. It's giving you an option. It's basically giving you a potential option, an alternative option, then hoping that everything comes together for you in 2023. If that's the case, if Matt Ryan doesn't have this bounce back season in 2022 and you're picking high in the draft, but maybe you're picking high in a draft that doesn't have multiple quarterbacks. Maybe there's not a Justin Herbert that's going to be there at pick 6. Maybe there's not a Justin Fields that's going to be there at pick 11. Maybe there's not going to be a Teddy Bridgewater or a Lamar Jackson there at 32 or wherever the case may be. You don't know. And so the whole point of taking a quarterback in 2022 on day 2 or whenever is to give you an option. It's basically, doing what the Eagles did, where you have Jalen Hurts and you have an option at the most critical position on the football field, in the event that you wind up going Carson Wentz and trading away Matt Ryan in 2023, so that you at least have, an insurance policy that in the event that things don't come together for you in 2023, you have an option. You don't necessarily need to have that at the tackle position right now. There isn't as much pressure on you to have that at the tackle position. So not to go off on a quarterback tangent, let's get back to the topic. This is why I tend to have a lot more, getting back to the topic at hand. This is why I have a lot more less patience for Jalen Mayfield than I seemingly have an endless amount of patience for Kaleb McGary. Because as I said on the podcast, I don't enjoy being on Kaleb McGary Island. The food sucks, the water tastes funny, the wine is spoiled, all these various things. All the amenities, it's got a funky smell or whatever, and there's like something crawling around in the ceiling that I think is like a squirrel or a raccoon or whatever the case may be, or a possum, whatever tropical animal that may bite me and give me rabies. It's terrible here on Kaleb McGary Island. But if the option is between vacationing here on Kaleb McGary Island or vacationing on bad interior offensive line island, which has now been rebranded as Jalen Mayfield Island, for the time being, I'd much rather stay on Kaleb McGary Island. Is kind of the point I'm trying to get to. Hey, if I have to vacation somewhere, I'd rather be on Kaleb McGary Island all day, every day. I'll pick that 10 times out of 10. Right. And Jalen Mayfield Island is just a temporary rebranding, because the island was previously James Carpenter Island, or Jamon Brown Island, Mike Person Island, Peter Kahn's Island, Garrett Reynolds Island, guys. This has been an issue for years and years and years, and the Falcons have continually ignored this problem. This is why we sat here, or at least I sat here and said, hey, Chris Lindstrom, finally the Falcons, after 8 years, finally addressed their right guard problem. You know what I'm saying? So this is why it seems like I have this beef against Jalen Mayfield specific. It's not Jalen Mayfield, guys. It wouldn't matter if it's Jalen Mayfield or anybody else, right? Now, that being said, objectively, Kaleb McGary had a worse game than Jalen Mayfield did. But, the hot take is that, this is probably the first or maybe second time that's happened this season where Kaleb McGary was objectively worse than Jalen Mayfield on the offensive line. The other 12, 13 times, where that went. And so, while Kaleb McGary is bad, and I would want to see this team upgrade that potential eventually, I'm not sure 2022 is the year to do it. 2022, the priority has to be left guard for the aforementioned reasons that we've gone over. So come this January, February, just like I was pounding the table for Joe Thuney 12 months ago, I'm going to be pounding the table for James Daniels or Austin Corbett or Laken Tomlinson or whoever to come in and solve the Falcons left guard position. Much harder than I'm going to be pounding the table for the Falcons to go out there and sign a Trent Brown or a Riley Reef. Would I be opposed to the Falcons signing those guys? Absolutely not. Look, you're going to hear me pounding the table more for the Falcons to go after a center this offseason in free agency, like a Ben Jones or even a Tyler Larson, than you're going to hear me talking about a tackle for the aforementioned reasons, because it's all about the interior of the offensive line. I'm 1000% behind this team re-signing Matt Gano to come in and compete and push Kaleb McGary. As I will reiterate, as I've said many times on this podcast, I believe Matt Gano is a better football player than Kaleb McGary. I believe that this Falcons offensive line would be significantly better with Matt Gano starting at right tackle than it is at Kaleb McGary. And unfortunately, circumstances and injuries have led to the reason why I don't think Matt Gano won that starting right tackle position outright in 2019, and then again this past summer in an open camp competition, right? So, the issue I have with that is I just don't have the confidence that the Falcons are going to feel that way about Matt Gano, because we talk about, oh, this regime doesn't have any loyalty to Kaleb McGary. Well, they have even less loyalty to Matt Gano, given that he basically, outside of like 2 weeks of OTAs, they've never seen him play. So we'll just sort of see how that goes. But again, this is going to be a topic of conversation that we're going to continue to talk about for the next, 4 or 5 months as we get geared up, for this offseason or whatever the case may be. But I just want to make that clear of why, even though Kaleb McGary was terrible in this game, absolutely, you're not going to sit here and hear me be like, well, this is proof that we got to get rid of Kaleb McGary and upgrade that position. I'm going to continue to harp on the Jalen Mayfield aspect of it, and even to a lesser extent the Matt Hennessy aspect of it. But I just want to explain that. So we'll leave out here with a question from Catch Chill Vibes, or Chill Catch Vibes on Twitter. He asks, Arthur Smith calls the plays, right? So what exactly is Dave Ragone responsible for? How do we grade our Atlanta's offensive coordinator? So yes, Arthur Smith does call the plays. We don't know what Dave Ragone is responsible for. Ragone, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think we grade him at all, because to me, he's a non-entity. He's an unknown variable. And I don't mean that in a harsh or negative way. We don't know what he does. And I'll use an example. Like, during this last coaching cycle, Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator for the Packers, was a guy that got a lot of buzz. And he, similar to Dave Ragone, does not call plays for the Packers. That is, of course, the purview of head coach Matt LaFleur. But the thing with Nathaniel Hackett is, the thing that he has been specifically called out for being predominantly responsible for is their sort of pregame red zone stuff, right? So Monday through Saturday, he's really focusing on the red zone stuff. And so he gets a lot of credit, rightly or wrongly, for the Packers red zone success. And so people were like, oh, that's proof that he's contributing. And, if he was calling plays, if he was a head coach, he would be good. Now, maybe Dave Ragone does the same thing. I have no idea. We don't know what Dave Ragone does Monday through Saturday. Maybe he does that. Maybe he does something else. I have no idea. But because we don't know, I'm not going to, that's why I say he's a non-entity, because as far as I'm concerned, his role does not exist. Obviously, he has a role, but because I don't know it, I have no reason to judge what his role is or isn't. So for me, Dave Ragone is just kind of a non-entity for me. It's not to say that he doesn't exist, but it's just like, I don't know what he does, so I don't think about what Dave Ragone does. So I hope that answers your question. I would recommend to you, until we find out more information about specifics of what Dave Ragone contributes to the team, don't worry about it. So that's where we'll leave it, guys, is with that. And we'll be back tomorrow for a crossover Thursday with Matt Derry, the host of the Locked On Lions, to preview this week 16 matchup between the Falcons and Lions, and see, what this Lions team has done to I won't say turn around their season, but to look much stronger over the last several weeks. And whether or not that's going to be a challenge for this Falcons team. And that will be, of course, on tomorrow's Locked On Falcons episode. If you want to provide your feedback, like Chill Catch Vibes, and ask questions for future Q&As, of course, you can do so on Twitter, like he did, by sending it to Locked On Falcons. You can go to Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can comment on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So that's going to do it, guys. And, as I duck out of here, I always have recommendations for what your second listen should be right after you turn off this Locked On Falcons podcast. And of course, that's the Locked On Bets podcast, where handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you his daily picks, his blowout specials, and his lock of the day to help you get a little bit of extra money in your pocket as you gear up for the NFL playoffs, for the college football playoffs, for the NBA, NHL, all that various stuff, UFC, boxing, all the various things that you go to betonline.ag for. Lee's got you covered there with all the best bets each and every day on the Locked On Bets podcast. And of course, like Locked On Falcons, that's free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify. Guys, appreciate you for tuning in. Appreciate you for letting me wax poetic on offensive line play and why, Kaleb McGary Island, despite being a terrible place, it's a much better place than the alternative over there. So I appreciate you for tuning in. If you want to provide feedback, of course, you know how to do that. Appreciate it, guys. Till then.